Everyone thought this was going to be just another celebrity legal scuffle, the kind that drags on quietly behind closed doors until it fades away. But what happened inside that courtroom flipped the entire narrative on its head, because when Judge Liman stepped in, this case didn't just weaken, it unraveled. And the reasons behind it have left fans, legal experts, and Hollywood watchers asking the same uncomfortable question. How did Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, two of the most carefully managed public figures in entertainment, end up here? From the outside, everything looked solid, calculated, and controlled. But courtrooms don't care about star power, public image, or charming interviews. They care about facts, consistency, and intent, and according to the judge's own words and rulings, that's exactly where things began to fall apart. Before we go any further, I want you to pause for a second and tell me in the comments, do you think celebrities should be held to the exact same legal scrutiny as everyone else? Or do you believe fame inevitably changes the way cases are handled? Because by the end of this video, that question is going to feel a lot heavier. What made this case so explosive wasn't just that it involved to a list names. It was how confident their legal position initially appeared. Early filings painted a picture of certainty, of a strategy that seemed airtight. But as the proceedings moved forward, Judge Liman began to signal something was off. Not emotionally, not politically, but procedurally. In federal court, procedure is everything, and when timelines don't align, when claims evolve too conveniently, and when legal arguments stretch beyond what the evidence actually supports, judges take notice. This is where the first cracks appeared. Court records show that several core arguments presented by the plaintiffs faced immediate skepticism, not because they were dramatic or controversial, but because they lacked the legal grounding required to sustain them. That distinction matters because a case doesn't collapse from one bad argument. It collapses when its foundation no longer supports its own weight. As Judge Liman reviewed the filings, motions, and responses, a pattern began to emerge, and this is where the narrative shifts from celebrity drama to legal reality. The court highlighted inconsistencies between public-facing claims and what could actually be substantiated under oath. That's not an accusation of wrongdoing, it's something far more damaging in legal terms. A credibility problem. Once credibility becomes an issue, every subsequent claim is viewed through a more critical lens. The judge emphasized that courts are not venues for strategic storytelling or reputational maneuvering. They are places where intent must be proven through evidence, not implication. That single distinction quietly undercut much of the momentum the case once had. Now here's where things get even more interesting. Because Judge Liman didn't just dismiss arguments. He explained why they failed, and those explanations are what sent shockwaves through legal commentary circles. The ruling made clear that certain claims appeared structured in a way that suggested leverage rather than resolution. In other words, the court questioned whether the case was designed to achieve a legal remedy or to exert pressure outside the courtroom. That matters, because federal judges are especially wary of litigation that seems aimed at outcomes beyond the legal system itself. This is the moment where the phrase exposed motives started circulating online, not because the judge accused anyone of malice, but because he made it clear that the court would not be used as a strategic tool. If you're still watching right now, I want you to hit the like button, not for me, but because pushing this conversa should help more people actually understand how celebrity cases work behind the scenes. And it also tells me you want the full breakdown all the way to the end. Because what comes next is where the tension really spikes. As the judge continued his analysis, he pointed to how certain legal thresholds simply were not met. Federal courts operate on standards that don't bend for fame, and when claims fail to clear those standards, they don't linger, they get cut. This is exactly what happened as key elements of the case were either dismissed or significantly narrowed, stripping the lawsuit of the force it once carried. What makes this especially compelling is how quickly public perception lagged behind legal reality. While headlines still framed the case as ongoing and serious, the courtroom told a different story. Legal analysts noted that once Judge Liman issued his reasoning, the path forward for the plaintiffs became extremely limited. In practical terms, this meant fewer options, less leverage, and a dramatically reduced chance of achieving the original objectives. This is often the quiet death of a case, not a dramatic verdict, but a series of judicial decisions that leave no room to maneuver. And that's exactly what we saw unfolding here. Let's be clear. because this is important for context and fairness. A case collapsing does not mean anyone was criminally wrong or morally corrupt. What it does mean is that the legal strategy did not survive judicial scrutiny. That distinction is what keeps this conversation grounded in fact rather than speculation. Judge Liman's role wasn't to judge character, it was to judge claims. And according to the record, those claims could not be sustained in the way they were presented. That's a hard pill to swallow for any plaintiff, especially when public expectations are sky high. Before we move deeper into how this impacts Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds moving forward, I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to answer honestly in the comments. Do you think public opinion should influence how we interpret legal outcomes? Or should court decisions always stand on their own, regardless of how beloved someone is, because that tension between law and celebrity is at the heart of this entire story? Also, if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed, because parts 2 and 3 are where we break down what this means for their public image, future legal risks, and why this ruling is being quietly studied by other celebrities and their legal teams right now. As part 1 comes to a close, here's the hook you need to sit with. Judge Liman didn't just weaken a case, he sent a message about boundaries, intent, and the limits of legal strategy in the spotlight. And in part 2, we're going to unpack the specific moments in the courtroom that changed everything, the language that raised eyebrows, and why legal experts say this ruling could have ripple effects far beyond this one case. Stay with me, because this story is just getting started. When the courtroom doors closed and the formal language of the ruling began circulating through legal circles, something subtle but powerful happened. The conversation stopped being about celebrity and started being about consequences. Judge Liman's words were not dramatic. They were precise, and that precision is what made them so devastating to the case. Legal experts immediately focused on how the judge framed intent, because intent is where many high-profile cases quietly collapse. The court made it clear that simply asserting harm or wrongdoing is not enough. There must be a direct, legally recognizable connection between actions and outcomes. In reviewing the filings, the judge emphasized that some of the claims relied too heavily on inference rather than demonstrable facts, and that distinction stripped the case of its emotional momentum. In a courtroom, emotion doesn't move the needle, evidence does. And when evidence fails to meet the required standard, the court has no obligation to let the case continue. What raised eyebrows across the legal community was how the judge addressed timing. Timing in litigation is not a minor detail. It can define whether a case survives or dies. The court pointed out that certain actions taken by the plaintiffs occurred in a sequence that weakened the credibility of their stated objectives. In simpler terms, the order of events did not support the narrative being presented. That matters, because judges look for consistency between what parties say they want and how they actually behave. When those two things diverge, courts begin questioning whether the lawsuit is being used for its intended purpose. This is where the idea of motives entered the conversation, not as an accusation, but as a legal observation rooted in procedural logic. As analysts dissected the ruling, one phrase kept resurfacing in commentary: litigation is not leverage. That principle sits at the heart of Judge Liman's reasoning. Federal courts are increasingly cautious about cases that appear structured to influence outcomes beyond legal relief, such as public opinion, negotiations, or reputational pressure. The judge's analysis suggested that some aspects of the case lean too close to that line. Again, this is not about assigning blame. It's about how courts protect the integrity of the legal system. When a judge believes a case risks being used as a tool rather than a remedy, intervention becomes inevitable. If you're still watching right now, this is where I want you to pause and really think about this, because it applies far beyond this one story. Drop a comment and tell me, do you think the legal system should step in more aggressively when lawsuits appear strategic rather than substantive? Or do you think that crosses into overreach? I read the comments, and this debate is exactly why stories like this matter. And if you're finding this breakdown valuable, share this video with someone who follows celebrity news but rarely hears what actually happens in court, because this is the part that never makes the headlines. Another critical moment came when the judge addressed the scope of the claims. Courts require lawsuits to be narrowly tailored, meaning they must address specific, provable issues rather than broad or sweeping assertions. According to the ruling, Several claims were simply too expansive to survive judicial scrutiny. When a court narrows a case, it doesn't just reduce its size, it reduces its power, suddenly. What once appeared like a comprehensive legal battle becomes a fragmented dispute, with limited reach. That shift alone can discourage further litigation, especially when the remaining claims no longer justify the cost, exposure, or risk involved. Behind the scenes, legal commentators noted that this kind of ruling often triggers intense reassessment within legal teams. Strategy meetings happen, options are weighed, and sometimes the conclusion is unavoidable. There is no viable path forward. That doesn't happen publicly. There's no press release announcing it, but the signs are there for those who know how to read them. When motions are denied, arguments are narrowed, and judicial language becomes increasingly firm. It signals that the court has effectively closed the door. That's what many experts believe happened here, even before any formal conclusion was announced. This is also where public perception and legal reality fully diverged. Online discussions continued framing the case as unresolved, while legal analysts quietly acknowledged that its core had already been dismantled. This disconnect is common in celebrity cases, because audiences are conditioned to expect dramatic endings, verdicts, or settlements. In reality, most cases end not with a bang, but with a slow erosion of viability. Judge Liman's rulings accelerated that erosion, making it increasingly difficult for the case to function as originally intended. If this analysis is changing the way you look at celebrity lawsuits, make sure you subscribe now, because Part 3 is where we connect all of this to what happens next, not just for Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, but for other public figures watching closely from the sidelines. And here's another question I want you to answer in the comments. Do you think celebrities underestimate how strictly courts apply procedural rules? Or do you think they rely too much on reputation and public goodwill to carry legal weight? As we approach the final stretch of this story, the tension lies not in what was said, but in what was made impossible. Judge Liman didn't need to accuse, criticize, or condemn. By enforcing standards, timelines, and evidentiary requirements, the court reshaped the entire trajectory of the case. That's the power of judicial restraint. It doesn't shout, it closes doors, and in Part 3, we're going to explore the aftermath, how this ruling affects public image, legal precedent, and why this case is already being cited as a cautionary tale in entertainment law circles. Stay with me, because the final implications are bigger than most people realize. By the time the legal dust began to settle, the most important shift had already occurred. Control of the narrative quietly moved away from public perception and back into the cold structure of the law. This is the moment most viewers never see, because it doesn't come with a verdict headline or a dramatic courtroom clip. It comes with silence, recalibration, and the unspoken acknowledgement that a strategy has reached its limit. For Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, the implications of Judge Liman's rulings extended far beyond this single case. In legal terms, the narrowing and dismissal of key claims didn't just weaken their position, it effectively changed the cost-benefit equation of continuing at all. Litigation at this level is expensive, invasive, and relentless. And when the potential outcomes no longer justify those costs, the smartest move is often to step back quietly rather than push forward publicly. What makes this aftermath especially significant is how closely other legal teams are watching. Entertainment lawyers have openly discussed how this case serves as a reminder that courts are increasingly intolerant of lawsuits that blur the line between legal redress and strategic pressure. Judge Liman's reasoning reinforced a growing judicial trend, one that emphasizes discipline, precision, and restraint. For celebrities accustomed to controlling narratives through media, branding, and public goodwill, this shift is uncomfortable. Courts are not platforms for influence. They are systems designed to resolve specific disputes under rigid rules. And this case demonstrated just how unforgiving those rules can be when tested. Now let's talk about public image, because this is where the tension becomes personal. Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds have spent years cultivating reputations built on relatability, humor, and approachability. Those images weren't created accidentally, they were carefully shaped through interviews, projects, and public appearances. When a legal case collapses under judicial scrutiny, it doesn't automatically damage that image, but it introduces a new layer of complexity. Fans begin asking questions. Commentators begin re-evaluating narratives, and suddenly, silence becomes louder than statements. In Hollywood, perception is currency, and uncertainty can be just as costly as controversy. Here's where I want you to engage directly, because this part matters. Do you think public figures should address legal setbacks openly to maintain transparency? Or do you think staying silent protects them more in the long run? Drop your answer in the comments, because this debate is exactly why cases like this linger in public conversation long after courtrooms move on. And if you've made it this far, take a second to share this video, because the more people understand how these cases actually unfold, the less power misinformation has to shape opinion beyond individual reputations. The ripple effects of this case are already being felt in legal strategy sessions across the industry. Lawyers representing high-profile clients are reassessing how they frame claims, how they structure timelines, and how they balance legal action with public relations. Judge Liman's rulings underscored that courts are paying closer attention to intent, scope, and consistency, especially when fame enters the equation. This doesn't mean celebrities can't pursue legitimate claims. It means they must do so with precision and restraint, or risk seeing their cases dismantled piece by piece. What's particularly telling is that no dramatic counteroffensive followed these rulings. No aggressive public rebuttals, no escalating legal maneuvers. Just a noticeable quiet. In legal terms, that quiet speaks volumes. It suggests acceptance of the court's boundaries and recognition that pushing further could invite deeper scrutiny. Sometimes the most strategic decision is knowing when not to fight, especially when the rules of the arena are no longer working in your favor. If you're still here right now, I want you to subscribe, because this channel breaks down stories the way headlines never do, focusing on what actually happens after the cameras stop rolling. And here's one final question I want you to think about. Do you believe this case will make celebrities more cautious about using the legal system? Or will fame always encourage risk-taking despite the consequences? Let me know what you think, because your perspective adds depth to this conversation. As we reach the end of this story, the real takeaway isn't about winners or losers, it's about limits. Judge Liman didn't need to make a spectacle to send a message. By enforcing standards and refusing to bend them, the court reminded everyone watching that the law operates independently of image, influence, or popularity. This case didn't collapse because of scandal, it collapsed because it couldn't stand on legal ground. And that lesson, quiet but powerful, is one that will echo far beyond this moment. If you stayed until the end, you're exactly the kind of viewer this channel is built for. Like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and keep the conversation going in the comments. Because the next case, the next headline, the next controversy may look different on the surface, but behind the scenes, the rules remain the same.